sir.
We'll call to order the August 24th regular meeting of the Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners and begin with a moment of silence. Thank you. Commissioner Farrell, please start, sir.
Would everyone rise for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our first order of business will be to approve the consent agenda. Are there any changes, additions, deletions to the consent agenda? Any questions about it? We have August 10 minutes, Finance Officer's report for the first month of this fiscal year, and a resolution accepting a revolving loan fund.
I'd just like to make mention of one correction to the minutes that emailed out, and Alice has put before us this evening on page 3 of the August 10 meeting minutes. Third paragraph, second line, it makes reference to 200-foot buffer, and the map actually shows 250-foot buffer. So just made that correction for the record. I would like to pull item number 3 of the consent agenda for a brief discussion, and I guess place that in item number 1, old business. Modifications to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. The consent agenda as modified and approved. Let's see here. So we need to approve the regular agenda. We have one change. No, we don't. I was thinking that's already been corrected. Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The remainder of the agenda is approved as written, and brings us to citizen matters. Let's see, I think we have 4 people signed up. Procedural issue. The first person who signed up is asking to speak on an issue that's on the agenda, which is contrary to our procedural rules. It's the Davie Street cottages. So this is not a public hearing on that issue. What's the attorney's advice? What's the will of the board?
It's the will of the board, which policy is clear.
Yeah. So is there any issues around having what amounts to a public hearing without noticing it, or since it's just a single person?
Public hearing is not required for this.
Not required. Okay. What's the will of the board? We have one citizen who would like 3 minutes of our time to address an issue like that item.
Right here.
Like here, okay. We'll call Ethel Farrell of Davie Street.
Yes, I will only take probably a minute of your time.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that the commissioners all got my letter and the petition that was signed by the neighbors in the community, as well as showing pictures of problems on my property.
You mentioned the letter. I didn't get copies.
How was
The commissioners, I mailed to the commissioners last week. I have a copy of the letter and the petition.
Yeah.
I didn't get anything like that. Did you send it to the?
You didn't get it, I sent it to.
Was it email or
No,
regular mail?
regular mail.
I received it.
You did? Okay.
I wouldn't mind seeing that copy again, and that's great.
other people here who might be interested in that as well. So, in all fairness, we might want to hear from them as well at some point.
You would want to entertain that on the same subject?
We have this here in the audience.
Yeah. Well, the applicant will
These are
get it up.
what it's called.
She got an extra, I didn't bring it. I got there. No, extra. I had it, just didn't know how to read it.
Okay. And any other citizens here other than the applicant who want to address this issue, since we've allowed one person to do so? I think we can hear from the applicant when the item comes up. Okay. In that case, the next speaker is Captain Dowler.
Good evening. I just wanted to follow up on some of the presentations that were given at the end of last month. Brooke Massa from the Wildlife Resource Commission came in and gave a presentation on the Conservation Ordinance Review Committee's recommendations for the Natural Resource Conservation Ordinance. And then I gave a presentation to the Planning Board on those recommendations, as well as recommendations from that committee on the tree protection ordinance. And I've been gone for the last several weeks, but I just wanted to see if you guys had thought more about potential next steps. I know that Brooke suggested that you might want to do a work session where we could talk to you about all the recommendations for the two different ordinances, or that potentially the overlay district from the Natural Resource Conservation Ordinance could be used as a plan, used for reviewing development plans, or possibly that one or both of these ordinances could be adopted as standalone ordinances, or if you could give direction to Clarion that they be incorporated into the UDO work that they're doing.
My recollection is that we already did that at Clarion. Did we not agree that you would modify your timeline and milestones to include some dovetailing of those efforts?
The timeline on UDO, there are two parts, two modules. One is procedures, one is standards. I'll work on procedures as well along, and we're hoping to have that to start showing around and get input on it in September, and then the standards. There's very, very interesting information, both details and recommendations that were compiled by that committee, and it's our intent as your UDO consultant to be reading that carefully and seeing if, where, and how those recommendations might be considered in the new UDO, and putting that on the table along with the other materials that we'll be reading.
I think we did acknowledge that it was not a good idea to do the standalone, given the fact that we've got lots of standalone right now. We're trying to solve that issue and to incorporate it into the UDO, but I think we also were receptive to the idea of a work session.
Actually, it's a work session. And it's something to think about too when we're looking at the process for the small area plans. You know, there's mention of looking at the recommendations for the Triangle Lake Conservancy, but I'd like those also be considered when we're reviewing small area plans.
Well, certainly, I mean, it's available if you wanted to direct the staff to using that when they do reviews, or yourself.
I think we'd have to adopt it before we
Correct.
used it.
It's just some of the maps that have been done, if you were considering looking at the maps that they've created, there's some very good maps.
So I'm available pretty much any weekend in September. If you're still potentially thinking about a Saturday work session.
Well, while we talk about the Commissioner concerns, we have another work session that we have to
Okay.
as well. So we'll put that on the end of the meeting. And somebody will get in touch with you about what you're saying September.
September, I mean, just what's coming up.
Okay.
Right.
Not sure we'll settle on a Saturday, but we'll
Right, okay.
settle on a date.
Yeah, I only mentioned Saturday because that's what Brooks said that it might be, but, yeah. Other dates we've had.
Saturday, so I don't know if I can know some of the other availability for that Saturday.
Okay. Well, I'm available during the week too, so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next speaker, Casey Mann.
Good evening. I am Casey Mann. I reside at 185 Tumor Loop here in Pittsboro. And I am here today as a member of the AME Zion Church, Mitchell's Chapel, and to offer a resolution for consideration. Whereas the Durham district of the AME Zion Church will be holding its 90th, and that's 90, session of the district in Pittsboro, here in Pittsboro, on Thursday, August 27th and Friday, August 28th. And as the district is comprised of a large number of AME Zion churches in Chatham County and around the Triangle. And the host church for this very important event is indeed Mitchell Chapel Church, which is located at 1025 Mitchell's Chapel Road here in Pittsboro. And the host pastor is Reverend Anthony Davis, also of Pittsboro, North Carolina. I am asking that the Board of Commissioners for the town of Pittsboro offer a resolution to name Thursday, August 27th, as Mitchell Chapel Day. And on behalf of the town, and welcome the attendees to the two-day conference and attend to the two-day conference here in Pittsboro. I have a copy of this here, and we sent it to Alice.
She made a copy.
Thank you, Ms. Alice.
Thank you. It's the will of the board with respect to this proposed resolution.
Is there anyone from the church here this evening? Okay. And nobody else? Okay.
I'm actually bringing greetings on that day. So I will be there at that because I am a member of AME Zion Church and Mitchell's is my family church. So I will be there bringing greetings on behalf of the town.
I mean, I feel confident we have representation from the town board.
So what's the will of the board? We want to accept Commissioner Baldwin's suggestion that she carry the greetings of the board to that meeting. So,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, I think so. Okay. Randolph Fuller.
Good evening. To be clear, Reverend Anthony Davis asked me to bring that. That's why Casey gave it to you. So it's pretty much ceremonial if the town does that or not. And there'll probably be other members of the community coming to do the greetings. But that came from Reverend Davis. Good evening, Commissioners and Mayor Terry. And good evening to former Commissioner Ethel Farrell, who when I first came to Pittsboro, you were on this board quite a long time ago. As a former colleague, I have learned to appreciate the vantage point from the audience. It's a different vantage point. I want to thank you for your hard work, and I also want to honor all the candidates running for election in Pittsboro this fall. I've come to the last few meetings, and I think everyone's in the room, which says a lot about our community. Now, I may not agree with you, and I will compete with you, but at the end of the day, I will work with all of you to make Pittsboro a better place and one of the best communities in North Carolina, which I think that this board and previous boards has been doing. To that end, I want to raise a vexing issue that I believe that we, as leaders, must come together to stop cold, and that is false accusations against members of this current board and former members of the board. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, There were comments made at the June meeting that I attended and at a recent July County BOC meeting when Commissioner Fiocco represented the town of Pittsboro that frankly were false. And these comments imply that there's some level of corruption on the board. And this should not be. People can have opinions. They may not like the votes that are taken, but I don't think that that is something that we should allow, and I think that we should take a stand. Now, certainly, there's a difference of opinion in this room and in the community about the approved PDD and the master plan for Chatham Park, but I think that we can all agree that although committee members can come up and community members can come up and address the board and be vociferous in their opinions, I don't think we should allow folks to cast aspersions on this board and members of the board that are simply not true and former members of the board. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, that brings us to the end of citizen matters. Anybody else in the room who want to sign up that would like an opportunity to speak? Now we'll move on to our first item of business, is a public hearing on the Thompson Street Townhouse rezoning. We need a motion to go to public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are on public hearing on the Thompson Street Townhouse rezoning special use permit.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Board of Commissioners, good evening. I'm Roger Walden. I am temporarily helping to run your planning department while you are seeking to replace your former planning director. So I have been enjoying my time in Pittsboro and enjoying your meetings, and it's really a clear place. Okay, the agenda item we have in front of you tonight is a request for rezoning and special use permit for it's being referred to as Thompson Street townhouses. This is a small parcel, and it's right around the corner. You can throw, I don't know if you can throw a baseball there or not. It's very close. And it's property that is currently zoned C2, and the request is to, and there's a medical office building there, and the request is to, the medical office building faces East Street. Request is to take the about a third of an acre that fronts on Thompson Street, rezone that to R10, and authorize a special use permit for 3 townhouses. So what you have in your packet is the location of the property and aerial photograph of the surroundings, and the applicant's representation of what the townhouses might look like. Proposed to use the same model that's been built elsewhere. So, public hearing tonight for you to hear from anybody who has an opinion on this, and then following the public hearing, this will go to the Planning Commission for review and recommendation, and then come back to you for action. And as with any rezonings, one of the things that the Planning Commission will be asked to do is to prepare and submit to you a statement regarding consistency with the town's comprehensive plan. So that will be coming to you following the planning board's review. Thank you.
I probably should have started this by saying that nobody has signed up for a public hearing, but we still get a staff report. Do you represent the applicant?
Yes.
Would you like to speak to me in there?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners and staff. I'm Mark Ashmus with the C Group, and we're representing the client K Diamond USA LLC. They also own the medical facility that fronts on 64 Business. And as Roger mentioned, it's somewhat of a unique parcel in that it has frontage both on 64 Business and on Thompson Street. Given that fact, and the fact that the uses on Thompson Street are residential in nature, and looking into the future, the likelihood of more infill happening within the town proper, we thought this would be a good use of that land. So, as Roger mentioned, the site is currently zoned C2, so we're seeking to rezone it R10 just on the back side that fronts Thompson, which is complementary to the existing uses on Thompson Street, and then requesting a special use to build 3 townhome units. You can see there's off-street parking, so there'll be a side parking lot coming directly off Thompson Street with no drives in the front of the townhomes. And then there'll be a sidewalk, obviously, in front of the townhomes also. And then I think you saw the elevation of what the units may look like. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Board have any questions for Mr. Ashnes?
I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Walton. So I think we're looking at a request for a rezoning and a special use permit simultaneous. Are we therefore looking at a conditional zoning that ties the SUP to the zoning?
I don't think so.
Okay, so they will stand alone. So if the SUP is granted and they choose to do something other than that project, they'll come back before the board with a different site plan.
Yes.
Okay. And I think not only are we talking about rezoning a portion of the parcel, but we're actually subdividing the parcel. Is that correct? How many? And we'll end up with 4 lots? One for each townhome plus a common area?
That's correct. Yeah. So right now, that's a single lot that the medical facility exists on. So this will essentially subdivide it into 2 lots, and then ultimately you would have 3 townhome units and a common open space that the association would own and maintain.
Okay. And if the special use permit is granted with this level of documentation, will a site plan or a subdivision plan then come back before the board for scrutiny of fine-tooth details of the zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll look it up.
Because I'm thinking that if we grant the special use permit, that's authorization to move forward without coming back with a site plan.
I don't think you need a site plan because it's not commercial, it's residential. But you might, I think you do need a subdivision.
Subdivision. So we would talk about minimum lot sizes and all those things at that time, and not during the special use permit process.
Well, you shouldn't approve a special use permit if the lot sizes are not adequate in the first place. I can't read it.
Well, I think that's getting to one of my points is I don't know that we've got enough documentation to make all those findings. At least not what I've got presented to me. We've got one sheet of paper.
We submitted a landscape plan, a specific site plan that has dimensions. So there is a little more detailed information that was submitted in the package.
Yeah, we may get that later. It's not up for a decision.
That's right. It's not a public hearing, so you'll see it again after planning board. But yes, we submitted a document that met all the criteria that's noted in your checklist for submittal.
Okay. And I don't think that I find all that information in my packet, so I'm suspecting that it wasn't posted on the website, so I'm not sure that everybody had all the information to make comment on during the public hearing.
Well, I assume the attorneys were notified.
Right.
One clarification. I didn't understand your answer to Mr. Field's question about the number of lots. Is this going to be 2 lots when it's done, or will it be 4? Are the individual units going to be for sale individually?
Yes.
Or is this a rental complex?
No. This is individual sales, so that those will be 3 lots, and then there would be another lot that would be the common homeowners association. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. These are not rental properties.
These are individually
Yes.
subdivided for sale.
And I guess the site is so small it's exempt from the Jordan stormwater regulations.
It is underneath the criteria for that. The site is generally flat, and actually the surface water drainage from the site drains onto the medical office facility site. There's some existing swales on that property. Since the client owns that piece of property, it's certainly in his interest to make sure that we don't do anything that impairs that piece.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions on this public hearing? You want to have a motion to go out of public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. We're out of public hearing. We're moving on to old business number 1, which is the revolving fund loan item that Mr. Fielko asked me to pull from.
Just want to get clarification or clarity on an issue. I know this is an important topic for us and something we've been working on for quite some time. And I think it is, in quotes, a find and fix project.
Term of art.
Yeah, I like it. It's pretty descriptive. Helps us figure it out quickly. And so when I'm looking through all the documents, one of the things that I'm concerned about is whether or not the design, the finding part and the part for designing a solution, if that's covered by these loan proceeds. I think that it is. However, it seems as though we won't go to closing until all the construction documents are prepared, approved, and a contract is let. So I'm concerned that we go through a lengthy find process, a process of design of the solution, and for whatever reason, the project doesn't move forward. And we have now probably spent tens of thousands of dollars on finding and designing, yet no loan proceeds for the fixing. So that's my concern, is are we exposed, will we have to contribute funds for the design portion and rely on reimbursement through this loan? And without the loan, do we end up with a finely designed solution and no money to execute it?
Well, you can, documents indicates that you can't expand the loan project up to $500,000. But I think first, to your point, we have to design it and then make that determination.
Right.
And then, if necessary, come back and revisit the loan.
So do you, I don't know that it helps me get any more comfortable with the idea that, I just want us, I think, to acknowledge that it appears to me that we will be taking risk in doing the design prior to closing the loan.
If you choose to go over a certain amount, then yes.
Yeah, but I don't think it's any more risk than if we were paying for it. If we choose to back out of the project, we get a risk. If we are funded totally from town funds, we would be risking our...
No, I think that's accurate, but I also say that I looked at it as a scalable project. In kind of the same way that we would be looking at, forgive me, asphalt paving, where we bid it out, we know that we have a certain amount budgeted with help from Colville funding. If and when we bid it out, we find that the bid amounts far exceed what we budgeted, and at that point in time, we revisit whether or not we want to move forward with the full paving roster as contemplated, or do we want to be part of the project?
I would feel more comfortable if I was closing on this loan knowing that my design services were going to get reimbursed. I don't think we're in that situation.
I think it says in the document that design is a legitimate expense, but I think you're right. The way I read this, the way it's structured is you don't make a one-time draw of $194,500. You submit pay requests from your consultants, your designer, and your construction company as the town pays those bills that you can submit to the state for reimbursement, is the way I read it.
Once you've got a loan.
Once you've got the loan.
And you don't get the loan until you've got construction documents prepared.
Okay.
So you've already spent it.
You fronted that.
Yeah.
You can get it back, but you have fronted it.
Yes. So another point, I think you had an interpretation that it is scalable and you can increase the project. Do you think it's by $500,000 or up to a maximum of $500,000?
If you look at in the overview section,
Yeah.
The second page of that overview and guides to the very top bullet. In the event that bid exceed the project budget, a loan increase up to 10%, but not over $500,000, which we're pretty close to, can be authorized without additional approval of LGC. So I think in your scenario, I mean, and this is me speculating on worst case scenarios, but in your scenario, which I guess would be a worst case scenario, is if we had to go back to the LGC and revisit the scalability of the project, and that's what I would recommend that we do if we come to that bridge.
In a way, I read that 10% up to 500,000 was not that I could increase it by 500,000, i.e. double my loan,
Yeah,
but I could only go up by $2,000 or $3,000 because I'm at
494, right?
Yeah.
So we could go up to 500,000.
Okay.
But that would be without approval from LDC. So if we found the mother of all fixed projects, and you felt very strongly as a board you wanted to tackle the entire roster, then my recommendation at that point in time, if you wanted to move forward with the full buffet, then we approach LGC with it. If not, then we explore the feasibility of phasing, which, you know, at various iterations of this as we've gone along, I know Fred has gone back and forth with Diener on how exactly to do that. Diener at one point in time, you know, looked at different iterations of those options. We would do all of it once, we would do some of it. And this is where the spinner landed.
Well, my reason for pulling it was to make sure I understood the equation, and if anyone else had any questions, to understand that, you know, it's not. We will have to expend some funds before we get this loan. I don't think that the loan's at risk. Well, I should never say that. I mean, it's always at risk, but I just wanted to better understand that. So.
And by spending funds.
For design.
Right. What do you think? Do you have any ideas?
Do we have an estimate on design funding of the project? Part of the, you know, it's kind of hard to know because first you have to do the finding, which will cost money in and of itself. And once you find it, then you've got to design a solution. So
We're having the numbers discussed. And
yeah.
I want to go back and check our notes on that. And Fred's out of town, of course, right now, so he's not here to be able to help explain this.
Typically, as an estimating factor, you use 10 to 15%, which in this case would be what, 50 to 75,000. That's just the ballpark width.
Yeah, I don't think it was anything approaching 75,000.
Will we also be using hydrostructure in this?
Yeah, we'd be using hydrostructures because hydrostructures has what I would consider kind of like a drone or a robot that actually goes into the sewer lines and records, videotapes it essentially. And then we had another company that we were looking at to actually manage the data.
Will that be bidded out?
I'm sorry?
Will that be bidded?
They actually had released the RFQ for that, RFP for that in the last month. And so we received two firms. We received a bid from two firms, or bids from two firms, Hydrostructures and W.K. Dixon. And W.K. Dixon would be the firm that we would be looking towards managing the data that's found. In other words, trying to form what type of fix would be necessary. Hydrostructures would be the firm that would be actually supplying the hardware basically to help record the data. So we take that first phase, and then we come up with design services from the two of them, and we would then need to check back in with Diener on cost and preparing bid documents.
Well, I think Commissioner Field was right to be concerned to ask the questions. You know, we all can remember projects where we started out thinking we had a $50,000 commitment, and before we cut the ribbon on the project, it got up to $750,000. So it's good to ask these questions at the beginning.
Well, and I do support the idea because I know it has a big impact on our wastewater plant's capacity. When we eliminate a lot of the stormwater that's presently seeping in and going to our plant and getting processed unnecessarily, I think we've shown in the past that we've had really great results with this in reducing the amount of water, unintended water going to the treatment plant, and having cost overruns down at the treatment plant, having upsets at the treatment plant based on the additional volume. So this will have a meaningful impact on that.
I don't think there's any doubt that we need to do it.
So with that,
This is all loan and no opportunity for any conversion to grant.
That's correct.
Okay.
I like the interest rate,
Yeah, that's good.
0. Well, with that, I'll make a resolution to accept the offer.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. We close the meeting and proceed. Next item of old business, golf cart ordinance report from Chief Crutchfield.
Good evening. As y'all know, back during the May 11th meeting this year that we were asked to consider implementing an ordinance that will allow golf carts to be operated on town streets. This request was submitted by Casey Mann pursuant to provision of North Carolina statutes. Just to update you on it, as you know, we kept y'all briefed with the memo last month. I've actually received more input from the community about this than I expected. I kind of thought, this will be one of those minor things, but I've had a lot of citizens, and one business asked me about it. One business is actually thinking if we pass this of getting in the golf cart business. So it's brought us some pretty good conversations in town. So basically, I just thought it would be important that we go over what our options are. And if y'all don't mind, I'm not going to read verbatim off the report. But first, I think it's important that we understand what is already legal. And under North Carolina law, there is a provision allowing what they call low-speed vehicles on certain roadways. And I've attached a copy of the North Carolina Journal statute. And basically that is, if y'all have seen them in some resort communities, if you go down to the coast, some beach areas, and even in other states, they can take what's considered a low-speed vehicle, and these are golf carts that have been modified, electric vehicles, electric trucks, and they've been modified to meet these federal standards, and they can register it with the state of North Carolina, proving that they have the proper safety equipment and the proper insurance and MLE provisions, and it's actually a registered motor vehicle under the state statutes. If someone has one registered under these provisions, they can operate it like any motor vehicle in the town of Pittsburgh on any street that's posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour or less. So that's one of the options that's already out there to all the citizens of the state of North Carolina right now. If they equip and register their golf cart as a low-speed vehicle, they could be driving on the streets of Pittsburgh right now. And the second option is North Carolina statutes do have a provision for registration of golf carts, regulation of golf carts on streets, roads, and highways. As y'all see in the attached statute, and Mr. Messick will probably correct me if I'm wrong, we do have a provision in the North Carolina statutes that allows us to allow for golf carts to be operated on city streets. And these don't have to necessarily meet the regulations of a low-speed vehicle for the state. And under these provisions, which is the provision which Ms. Mann submitted her request, I assume, is that we can decide what regulations, what safety equipment we do desire to be installed in vehicles, and what other things, such as insurance, whether they have a driver's license, what restrictions we want to put on it. And we can have a registration process and allow a golf cart to be registered to be operated on town streets. It does regulate that it can't be on the street, just like the state statute that goes over 35 miles per hour, and the state does in this provision require that the operator be at least 16 years of age, just like a regular motor vehicle. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I'd put in the memo that those are really our two options. Option A is really by default, if we do nothing, anyone can go under the state standard right now, have their golf carts, upfitted under a low-speed vehicle, have it registered, and they could be operated in any way. Or option B is we decide what provisions under which we would like a golf cart to be provided if we decide to do that, and then we could pass an ordinance with those restrictions. Now, that said, on the model ordinance that we were provided with by Ms. Mann, I will say that it was pretty well written and it looked like it was carefully researched. I've talked with some other agencies. I've looked over several ordinances from the Stadnor-Con, I think Pinehurst, Belmont, Ocean Isle, or one of the beaches, a couple of others, and I've compared it to that, and it's pretty much, mostly comparing apples to apples. Some have different provisions, some don't. Some of the things that I like in the ordinance, now I'm not endorsing it one way or another, please don't get me that way, but if we are going to consider one, I do like the fact that some require insurance. I feel like that would be a very important thing, just protect all our citizens if they're involved in an accident. It'll protect anybody that they have an accident with, also passengers in the vehicle. I like the fact that some towns require you to be a licensed driver. That kind of removes all doubt. They still have to be a licensed driver to operate it. Those are some of the provisions that, in my capacity, I definitely see would be pluses that we put in there. One of the things, if you saw in the memo that I made for y'all, most towns don't, that I looked at, require an occupant restraint system, but I still feel like, as a law enforcement officer, and the safety of our citizens is one of my top priorities, that I need to bring that in the discussion so y'all can consider whether or not you want to require them to have them retrofitted with occupant restraint systems. And I'm by no means an expert on these things, but I've been researching, reading a lot of the guidelines, and I'm more learned about golf carts now than I've ever been, and the safety and other issues. And of course, if you saw in the memo, there are advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, they're easy to operate. They're obviously more environmentally friendly. They're more accessible, but also there are the safety concerns that you would have with one. That would be the biggest negative, because they're obviously not going to be as safe as a motor vehicle that meets the federal safety regulations. But that said, neither are bicycles and neither are mopeds. They're going up and down the street either. So they have their pros and cons.
I just had a question. There's no mention of children on this. Are children generally allowed to ride as passengers in these, and are they required to wear, child seats?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's the one that kind of made me mention the occupant restraint system. Children aren't really allowed to ride, but in one of the safety studies I read, the biggest concern with children in a golf cart is if you've ever rode a golf cart, the driver's pretty safe because they are going at low speed and he's got the steering wheel. And most adults, we can grab that handle or something. But the injuries that do happen to children are when they make a hard left, because there's no high side if it doesn't have a seat belt. Sometimes children fall out and they'll hit their head on the asphalt or whatever the hard surface is, and it causes head injuries. So that would be my concern with small children more than anything, because they don't have the upper body strength nor the average height that sometimes when it makes a left on one of the safety studies I read. And like I said, I've actually tried to research this fairly well because I want to be the best informed I can to tell y'all, the pros and cons. And that is a concern. Now, that said, if we want to require a minimum age to ride or a safety seat, a safety belt for a certain age ride passenger, that's all up to y'all. We can tailor this ordinance, and Mr. Messick, correct me if I'm wrong, to have what are provisions we want in our ordinance to allow golf carts.
Personnel, I think we may have talked about that earlier. Down 64 and 15501, were we just going to allow crossing, or going to be able to go parallel with the street?
The way I understand the ordinance is, if we allow one, of course, if it's a low-speed vehicle, it can be on any. But this ordinance only allows us to operate them on our town streets. So any DOT-maintained roadway, which would be US 64, 15501, the 87 Connector Road, and a portion of Thompson Street, technically I don't think they'd be allowed to do anything but cross.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that's...
Sorry?
Yeah, you can cross it.
Yeah, you can cross, but they can't drive on.
Yeah.
So,
Can they use bike lanes?
ma'am?
Can they use bike lanes?
Not anything I've read, and most of the model ordinances I've read, they don't even allow, obviously, like if you're going to park, you have parking space designated for vehicles. You can't be parking on the sidewalk.
The reason I'm asking, I think Chatham Park, with their network of bike lanes, I'm sure there'll be people that would love to ride golf carts.
So, and I'm assuming that Of course, that would actually be a private property unless it's a town-maintained greenway. I'm assuming we might could put that in our ordinance. Mr. Messick, do you have any opinion on that? If it's a town greenway, I assume that's our property, so we could allow it. But the only thing is, the way I read it, and again, I could be wrong, but a DOT-maintained road still would have to comply with the state standards, but a street that's owned by the town, owned or maintained by the town of Pittsburgh, we can allow it under these provisions.
I have a question. When you say crossing a DOT-designated road or a DOT road, is that like the cross area on, say, Salisbury and Main Street? Because when I think crossing, I think, say, coming from our neighborhood, heading over to the mill, there's no light or anything.
Yeah, even if there's no light, they
So
can...
if you're crossing and you can't get the speed, then that seems like a really dangerous situation to me with no lights.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where you get to those, but, you know...
If you're a pedestrian, if you're a golf cart, somebody guns it, then...
But for example, if you wanted to come up Martin Luther King right here and cross, or if you came up Davie Street and could go across there to Toomer Loop, that would be legal the way I see it. Now, like you said, sometimes that's a busy intersection, but we have, you know, pedestrians, bicycles, and scooters, you know, motoring around town also. So I don't want, you know, we have other people there. They're very cautiously doing it also.
Chief, on the section 2 that talks about registration and fees, we don't really call out a fee amount or talk about the collection of the fee. I assume there would be one. Would we establish that, and will all the other fees we have in the budget rather than put it in here?
You should put it in there, but it would be easier to have it as part of the fee schedule.
Part of the fee schedule in the budget, yeah. So maybe we should say that with the fees to be submitted with the registration application, and that the amount will be determined in the bid.
Yes, sir. Because if we charge a fee and do register them, I'd like us to have at least some type of registration sticker, so some officers will know it's one that's been validly registered. And if we, at that would be the time that we require them to have insurance, they would have to also provide a proof of insurance coverage with the registration fee. So at least we have something on file, and we'd also have a standard liability waiver that we'd want them to sign with the registration. Also, obviously not holding the town liable.
And in section 3, you left it blank there. It says maximum penalty for violation shall be $blank.
Yes, sir.
I assume if there's a violation, then we get a traffic ticket just like anybody.
Yeah, if we give them a citation for violation of motor vehicle laws, that would be the set standard by the administrative office of the courts. But if we're charging with violating town ordinance, that would be the fee that would be set forth by the board, like any other violation of town ordinance, like a noise ordinance.
That's not revenue for the town. It
goes to the school
like any
system.
traffic ticket that goes to the school system.
Yes, sir. Any fees that are assessed in a traffic citation go to the Board of Education.
I think we'd be looking for a recommendation from you on what's the maximum.
Okay, and I'll be happy to get back with you on that. That's the one thing I didn't think to ask the other towns, but I know it's in their ordinances, so I can get that for you pretty quickly.
You're setting the maximum. I guess you would look for the most egregious violation and try and assign a fair value to that, whatever it was. I mean, going a mile over the speed limit wouldn't be the max, but reckless driving or reckless endangerment or something would be the high end, I would guess.
Yes.
Or driving while intoxicated or something.
Yeah, well, if they're driving while intoxicated, they're going to be charged, not with the town ordinance, they're going to be charged with all the NORCLINE motor vehicle violations.
I'm just saying, when you're figuring out what that max number is, it ought to be tied to whatever typical severe violation by experience would be. I'll be interested to hear your recommendation on what that number should be. Other than that, I think it's a well-crafted ordinance. Bring it back in a subsequent meeting with tweaks.
Well, I've got one comment. It makes mention throughout about operation on a public street. And, I can imagine, well, I can't think of anywhere in Pittsburgh right now that is a road system that is privately maintained, yet performs all the functions of a public road. It's in a subdivision, and that subdivision chose to have privately maintained roads. But there's 50 houses in the subdivision. Emergency vehicles are going to be coming in there on the same roads. All the same traffic patterns will occur on that privately maintained road. And would this exempt that roadway from these safety requirements?
Actually, it probably would, because that would be a public vehicular area, and some of those, depending on the development type, may not be a public vehicular area if it was a gated community, but in the PVAs, there's not so much we could regulate anyway. There aren't so many statutes that we can enforce in public vehicular areas.
Well, I think I would like to see this include those private roads.
Yeah. Well, they would be allowed to if the owner of that private property wants to allow them to, like in a lot of the communities. For example, I'm pretty sure from my experience with the Sheriff's Office, the Governor's Club, because that's a private road, the golf carts are up and down throughout there. So if it's a privately owned and maintained road, they can allow it if they want to. That's their private property. You know, the only restrictions that would apply would be the laws that apply to any vehicle on a public vehicle area, as far as impaired driving, careless and reckless driving, safe movement violations, possibly something like that.
I don't know. Mr. Messick, do you have any advice on that?
The town would not be in a position to authorize golf carts under this ordinance on private property. Be up to the individual developer. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So just because it's legal in town doesn't mean it's legal in...
Well, but the town would have the ability to require the roadways that are privately owned and maintained to be to a public standard. And therefore, the public safety is associated with that standard.
I don't think you're going to ask that the town police private roads in private gated communities. So, no, the answer is no. It may be constructed to a public standard, but it's not going to be necessarily maintained to a public standard or supervised, policed to a public standard.
Okay. Well, I just see it's the same equation, just a matter of who owns and maintains the roadway. But the roads function exactly the same.
But we're not talking about the roads. We're talking about people who are operating a golf cart. And you have the authority to regulate golf carts on town streets.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the authority to regulate golf carts on DOT streets or private streets. There is a limit to your authority.
Okay, thank you.
So any more other questions?
Yes.
I have one more though. First, Chief, just say Potterstone down at the south end of town.
Mm-hmm.
They would not, by 15501, they would not be able to use 15501 to come into town. Is that correct?
No, sir. The way I interpret the statute, since that's a state-maintained road, we can't give permission to use the state-maintained roads. The state does allow them to cross.
Right. So if they cross 87, then they would be on the 87 loop also.
Yeah, which is a state-maintained road. So they're kind of, until there's something connecting all those roads on that side, they're kind of stuck there. Now, if they did have that registered as a low-speed vehicle, they would be allowed to, because that section of state-maintained roads is 35 miles per hour less. So if they had one registered through the DMV, they could, pretty much if you had one registered with the DMV, you could drive it almost all of Pittsburgh city limits, with the exception of the section north of Miss Alice's house where it turns to 45, the connector road, and a section of town on this side. Everywhere else in town is 35 or below.
And Chief, you had talked about children, and we really probably need to address that in here also if we're going to pass this particular ordinance reference to children being passengers in those golf carts, because I would hate for a child to fall out, as you had explained in reference to it. So they would have to be definitely seat belted in or something, and we need to also put that in.
Yes, ma'am. That's, like I said, we can tailor the ordinances we see fit to protect our citizens. So if we wanted to put like an age restriction, like passengers under whatever age have to be, restrained by an occupant restraint system, we could put that in there. That is an option.
Agreed, that needs to be in there. if there's a seatbelt, you can. But isn't there a law about they can't ride in the front until they're a certain age, so. They have back seats now.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make it sound horrible, but the studies I have seen is small children, when it makes a hard left, if it turns left abruptly, because of, I think most of you probably rode a golf cart at some point in time, you know, if you're not holding on good, you could fall out, and you know, because they're so young and fragile, they could get a head injury. So that was the only. I mean, there's several concerns, obviously. I mean, I don't want anybody to run over anybody in a golf cart down, much less any car. But with small children, that was one of the things in the safety studies I'd read.
Yeah, that can happen to adults too, and it did at a golf tournament over in Durham a few years ago.
Yeah.
A young man was killed as a volunteer.
That's why it's here, and y'all give us what direction you want to go in, if you want to pursue this, and we'll be happy to look into it. Do what you ask.
So, what's the will of the board? Do we want them to bring this back to us with some of these changes, or do we want to write on it and write some notes and give it to the chief and then ask him to bring it back? Or what guidance do we want to give the staff on this? I've heard pretty strong comments about the issue of children in this thing. I think clearly they won't be allowed without restraints of some sort. And I don't know whether we want to allow infant seats or not. That's we need to probably have some more discussion on that.
It'd be interesting to see what the studies are. Who knows, it may be safer than being in a high-speed vehicle around town. I don't know.
Somebody want the chief to refine this and bring it back?
Refine it. I think it'd be good to refine it and bring it back.
Okay. Now you're talking about refine it with like some restraint requirements?
Yeah.
Okay. I think.
Added things that we talked
Okay.
about.
And the question
Be happy to
is,
look into
would
it.
adults be required to wear restraint too, or just children?
Yeah.
I think adults are required to.
Okay.
Yeah, adults can follow golf carts.
So you want us to require restraint, looking to require restraint systems?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, and they can be retrofitted with seat belts apparently fairly easily, I believe.
You know, Durham is manufacturing those vehicles that are foot pedals. They're like the golf carts that are foot pedal. We may start seeing some of those. I don't know if they use restraint or not.
Yeah.
I think we have to think about those kinds of things too.
You see, I think they might come under the bicycle statutes and may not be an issue that we could regulate anyway.
We see one of those in our planning department periodically.
That may fall under the low speed vehicle, I don't know. Okay, are we done with this one? First item of new business, preliminary plat review for Davy Street Cottages.
Hello again, Roger Walden. This is an application for a preliminary plat, and it's been an application that has generated interest and discussion. Davy Street, again, very, very close, very walkable from where we're sitting tonight. And this property is zoned R10 pocket neighborhood, and I use the term walkable just now intentionally because that's what that pocket neighborhood is supposed to be. It's supposed to be creating and allowing for development of a nature that is walkable, is compact, is designed to have units clustered together in proximity to our downtown area. So that's the purpose of the R10 zoning district. And that's how this property is owned. So that it's about two parcels together. It's about an acre in size, and what's being proposed on there is 9 residential dwelling units, and then a common parking area, gathering space, and so it's a subdivision, and so it's one of the things that has been very clear as we've gone through this process, gone to the planning commission, planning board twice on this. And there are concerns about tree preservation, concerns about storm drainage and stormwater management, and and landscaping. The one thing that's clear is that this application meets all the requirements of Pittsborough's zoning and subdivision regulations for a pocket neighborhood. And so we went to the planning board the first evening, and with the staff recommendation that the planning board recommended approval to the board of commissioners of this neighborhood, that it meets all of the requirements. And there was a good bit of discussion and among board members and applicant and neighbors. And the decision at the end of that night was let's give ourselves a little bit more time to look at this and see what other adjustments might be made. The applicant took the material and made some adjustments, talked to some of the folks, and you'll be hearing from the applicant tonight about some of the changes that have been made, not required, but that the applicant chose to make. We came back to the planning board, and again, staff was recommending recommending that the planning board recommend approval to the board of commissioners. And again, robust discussion that evening, and lots of different opinions. And the end result of the planning board's meeting, there was a motion made to recommend approval of this preliminary plan application to you, and the vote on that motion was 3-3. So there is no recommendation that comes to you from the planning board, because it was a tie vote. It's not a motion to recommend denial. It's not a motion to recommend approval. It's a no action recommendation. So we've got no recommendation there. Your staff continues to believe that this application meets the requirements of zoning and subdivision regulations, and so we are recommending to you that you approve the preliminary plat. And I expect that you will want to be hearing tonight from the applicant and describing in detail what they are doing, what they're proposing, and the nature of the discussions today. Thank you.
You want to hear from the applicant next?
Good evening. I'm Mike Dasher with Orange Communities. Also joining me, Landon Lovelace, who's the project engineer. I guess I'd like to start by asking if I can see a copy of what's been submitted to you as far as the petition, because I have not seen that, so I'm not sure what some of the issues are. I guess at the outset, I just want to reiterate our commitment to work with the neighbors to do whatever we can to alleviate any concerns. I think they've mostly been related to off-site stormwater issues, and again, we're happy to do whatever we can to address those. Aside from that, I'd be happy to answer any particular questions or go into any details that you guys see necessary.
I have a few questions now, but I don't want to address right now. But I know that I was at the planning board meeting, and I know it was quite lengthy in discussion with neighbors and all like this. And I think possibly maybe Mr. Gruesbeck or somebody should bring some of these comments to the other board members that were not here, or maybe Roger.
I can talk about that if you'd like me to.
Yeah, I think some of the board members might be interested in hearing some of the complaints and all that went through that night from the planning board. Yeah.
I guess I did it a little shorthand when I called it a robust discussion, because it was. A couple of issues, and one of them prominent is stormwater management. There is water that flows through this site, comes in from the back and across the street to flows onto properties across the street. And so one of the big points of focus was be sure that this applicant, in designing this development of this lot, is meeting all of the town's stormwater management requirements, which I believe they are. Fred Royal has been looking at this very carefully. And in terms of managing the flow of there is so as to not make conditions in the future after this development any worse than they are now. So there is not a requirement that this development correct problems that they're not creating. But they will be creating some additional stormwater circumstances with the building and impervious surface and so on, and so they're required to manage those, and so they've got several stormwater devices on the site. Some of the conversation at the planning board was, but that's not going to make things any better for us downstream, and I think the answer to that is yes, that's correct. And one of the things I mentioned that the applicant has offered to do, it's not required, but to help do some additional grading to help move the water past those houses across the street, those properties across the street, in a way that better than it is today. So anyway, that one issue, clearly stormwater, and again, my shorthand version is people were concerned, both nearby residents and some planning board members were also just wanting to be sure that this isn't doing any damage, not creating any problems that don't exist already, wondering if there's anything that can be done on this site to help, and a little, but not a lot. So that's one issue. Second issue is trees, and there are a couple of trees on this site that are going to be coming down, and that is. And none of us like that. All of us wish the trees wouldn't have to come down. So there are a couple that you see right in the middle of the site that, and we worked hard on that, looking, and this was staff and applicant, looking at ways that some of those, one or two of those trees right in the middle of the site might be able to be preserved. And our conclusion was, it can't be. And part of it has to do with the relation to stormwater, that because of the slope of the site and because of the requirement that the applicant has to put in some stormwater devices closer to Davie Street, the slopes are such that the roots of the trees on site would be damaged to the point that the trees could not be saved. So, that was another point, Mr. Farrell, that a lot of discussion about that, and a number of comments about people lamenting the loss of those trees. And one of the things that the applicant did following the planning board meeting was to give some additional attention to landscaping on the site, and to try and do as much as possible in the open space on the site to plant some new trees. I think that those were probably the two biggest issues that there was the most discussion about. Excuse me, also the density, and that's that again is something that we heard at the planning board meeting, that this is the zoning allows 10 units per acre, and this is an acre of land, and so there are 9 dwelling units here. So that is a significantly higher density than the properties around it. And one of the things that I have been saying is that this R10 zoning was placed here purposefully by the board because it's close to downtown. It's consistent with trying to achieve highly livable, walkable neighborhoods and so on. But it is contextually different from the properties around it that don't currently have that level of density. They might in the future, but they don't now.
Questions from the board for either the planner or the applicant?
I have one question. It's about the stormwater again. I was looking at those photographs that were passed around. Is that something, and I don't know where you're on.
Mr. Drew there.
Can you look at those, please? I was just concerned about how those actually look right now. And if they're going to do something across the street, is this something that needs to be fixed before they start building?
And I wonder if you might have some input about what your thoughts are about it, and I would like to hear from Seth.
And you will know the difference.
But, I mean,
Did you look at them?
Yes.
I'm actually I'm Landon Lovelace. I'm the engineer for the project, and I'm happy to answer any of the stormwater questions. I would actually love to see the photos as well. I'm guessing they're probably across the street on Ms. Farrell's property and not on the property, but I'll try to expand a little bit on the great explanations that Roger gave on some of the discussions that we had.
It was across the street, that's what it was.
Okay, so from a stormwater standpoint, there's an existing pond that's to the west of our site. It's got an existing outfall that currently comes to our site, and there's a drainage swale that goes through the middle of the site and goes to a culvert that's underneath Davie Street. Where that culvert goes underneath Davie Street, there's also an existing drainage ditch or a drainage swale that goes across Mrs. Farrell's property. I'm sure that's what the photos are of. So in a good storm, the swale fills up as it goes underneath Davie Street. It goes to her property, and then ultimately it continues to go east. There's a low-lying area, and it ends up coming down to the south and crosses Business 64. Again, as Roger mentioned, that's an existing drainage condition that is not being exacerbated by any of the development that we're doing, but the developer has agreed to help alleviate some of those. So the first thing is making sure that all the water that's going to the site isn't going to damage anything that we're developing on the site. So in working with the town engineer, Fred Royal, typically when we're sizing stormwater pipes for conveyance on a site like this, we will size them to handle a 10-year storm, which is basically a storm that you would expect to get once every 10 years. It's a pretty good sized storm. And speaking with Fred and looking at the nature of the development where we're at, he asked us to go ahead and do the size of the pipes for the 25-year storm, which is even more significant of a storm. So the existing bypass system, which basically the only function of the bypass system is to take the water that's currently coming from off-site, not being generated by the site at all, but coming from off-site and bypassing it, which is what it's doing right now. It's just doing it in a ditch through our site. When you get down to Davie Street, there's an existing culvert that goes underneath Davie Street that was actually laid backwards when it was put in. So what it actually does right now is it ponds water onto our site, or onto the owner's site. So part of the question was, okay, well, if we fix that culvert, which needs to be fixed, because right now it's creating a problem on our site, does that let more water go? Does it let the water go faster? Those kind of things. So the answer on does it let more water go? The answer is no. It lets the same exact amount of water is going there. And if you lay the pipe correctly, the water comes out of the end of the pipe more quickly. But we've got a plunge pool, which is a velocity dissipator. Basically, it slows the water down before it goes to the same exact area where it's going right now. One of the things that came out of that first planning meeting was, well, let's look downstream, and Mr. Royal went and met with Ms. Farrell and kind of walked her property, and then subsequently I went out there as well and didn't get a chance to catch up with her, but her son and another gentleman were out there, and we went and walked back around the property. And it's a relatively easy fix for an existing drainage problem. So we sized, basically, there's an existing swale there, and it's a V shape. We proposed that we would kind of flatten that out a little bit and actually give the water the correct place to go, so it's not coming up into her planting beds and up near her house. So again, that's not something that's required by the ordinance. We're meeting and exceeding the ordinance for all the stuff that we're doing on-site, but Mr. Dasher has agreed to do that off-site to help alleviate an existing drainage issue. Does that answer your question on the stormwater?
It does. I'm still concerned.
Sure.
So I think what you're saying is this bypass pipe running through the middle of the site is collecting water only from upstream.
Correct.
And none of the impervious surface that this project would generate is going to flow into that pipe before it goes through the bioretention cell.
Correct. That's exactly correct.
So
So all
to across the street.
say that again.
So that the water from that side is not going to go across the street, it's going to partition.
Right. The additional runoff that's generated, obviously, the site's grassed right now, and when we build the parking lot and build buildings on there, there's going to be more runoff generated than there is now. And per the state requirement and Pittsboro requirement, we're required to take all that additional runoff to a stormwater measure, which is a bioretention cell or a rain garden, which is located in the front of the site. So all of the new impervious, all of the development on the site is going to that bioretention before it's ultimately being released. It goes to the same point ultimately that the bypass goes to, but not before it's treated and held for the town of Pittsboro and state requirements.
And that requirement is detention of the 1 year?
1 year, 24-hour storm, that's correct. And we actually, we exceed that. We detain not only the 1 year, but the 2 year storm. And then we see less than 10% increase in the 10-year and the 100-year storm. So we're exceeding what the town of Pittsboro requirement, the state requirement is by a good bit.
And that's based on that design of that bioretention?
That's correct.
So, I've got some issues with the cell. I mean, I understand it's a very tight site. I think you're trying to put a lot on there. I think you've got a lot of requirements to meet. But, I look at things like that ditch, existing roadside ditch that's now going to get piped. And I see that pipe basically straddling the right-of-way line. And I see it very, very close to the bioretention cell, such that if it were ever to be dug up again, it would destroy the bioretention cell. So that's a concern of mine, obviously, that who's going to maintain that pipe, and do we have public right-of-way within which to do so, or do you have to grant an easement for access? And can that biocell shift back? The berm seems to be, I think there are geometric issues with it as well, such as a 2-foot wide top to the berm. I know it's not detaining a lot, but I don't think that's probably with the BMP manual. I know there's certain things that say it should be a 3-to-1 slope. Graphically, it's graded at a 2-to-1 slope. So, do you really have the area you're thinking that you've got for detention? I'm really very, very concerned about stormwater, and I understand that you're trying to bypass a lot of the flow and not have any effect on it and let it go exactly where it was going previously. Ms. Farrell, did you accept their offer for the improvements downstream on your property?
No, I like a 30-inch pipe laid on it and rub it all out. I don't want to deal with what their suggestion was.
So we might very well grant approval and you'll have no ability to execute that plan because the neighbor's not going to let you on their property. Which brings me to another point from a graphical perspective. I see the plunge pool. I see the plunge pool is within the public right-of-way. But is it actually drawn to scale? It is. And so I think it's going to have about 1.5 feet of water sitting in it until it evaporates.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm familiar with plunge pools being quite large.
For larger flows.
Yeah. And this is going to treat the 10-year storm? Or
the plunge pools for the 10-year.
For the 10-year. Okay.
And again, the downstream swale is to help with the velocity of the swale downstream. I can understand the concerns. Number one, the bioretention is sized appropriately. It's designed and graded per the BMP manual and per my 13 years of professional experience designing BMPs in North Carolina. As far as the off-site stuff goes, specifically the swale and the desire to have 30-inch pipe, I'm not sure what that would be based off of, but I just want to remind you that's not a requirement. That's something that Mike is willing to do to help alleviate an existing situation. And for an easy fix, you can take a small V channel and flatten it out and give it. If we start looking at burying a pipe, I don't know that there's elevation difference enough to actually bury a pipe and get the elevations that you need.
Right, it's a lot of dirt. Well, regarding the grading, the detail says it's at a 3-to-1 slope, but graphically it's clearly a 2-to-1 slope. So that's where I come up with the idea of, is it? I mean, if you can't draw it on paper, clearly you can't put it in the field. So that's where I'm coming from with that.
Which spot specifically?
The dam.
The berm?
Yeah.
And the berm is not a dam, so that berm isn't necessarily a dam, but the road acts as a dam. The berm is there to keep drainage from the runoff that's in Davie Street from coming into the fire retention. It doesn't function as a dam per se.
Well, if we think of a dam, regardless of size, as an impoundment,
right,
then it,
Well, it's not impounding. I mean, it's diverting the water from Davie Street.
So that bioretention cell is not going to fill up with water?
It will.
Okay, and what's going to hold it back?
The
earth? Okay. A couple of other things that I noticed about the plans that I'd like you to consider is you have a cross-section going through side to side, I guess north to south, and you got a retaining wall on one side, and on the other side you have a berm. So essentially, you're creating a condition where the water previously leaving the adjoiner's property is flowing through the middle of the property and out to the pipe running underneath the roadway. But the way you've got it graded, you're actually going to create a swale along each property line and have that water run down the property line and then into the roadside ditch. So really kind of changing how that water flows and relying on water flowing on the joiner's property that didn't heretofore flow. So instead of having berms, I would ask you to look at putting swales in. I think it'd also be I didn't see any safety fall protection on the retaining wall. Are you planning?
There, per North Carolina building code, when they go to get a building permit for it, if it's over 30 inches in height, they'll be required to put a fence on it.
So
it's an ongoing issue in the professional engineering community on whether or not who's responsible to call out or show a wall.
Right. And so would you be interested? I mean, I think the owner would be interested in specifying what that is and not leaving it up to the contractor to design a solution. On the north side, I think it makes a statement that buffering or screening will occur by a fence and or landscape planting. Given the character of the neighborhood, it'd be really helpful to know what that is, to specify it so that there aren't surprises during construction. So one of the biggest concerns that I have is right now, as you mentioned, it's a meadow, and it does have a pipe that's tilted the wrong way underneath that roadway, but it's essentially flat, so it's not hindering the flow dramatically. And so when a big storm comes, let's say the 100-year storm comes, that meadow can fill up with a lot of water before it tops the road. Right now, you're essentially creating a dam and allowing the 25-year storm to run
through a pipe underneath the site. So when that 100-year storm comes, I'm worried about all those houses, all 9 of them, and how they're going to be affected by that flow. And have you done a study that gives you the knowledge of where that flow is going to go on your site? And could you put it on the plans so that the builders and everybody who follows knows exactly where that boundary is and what the risk is, and so that they can put their floors of these buildings at the appropriate elevation?
We can, and we have. We show overland relief on the grading plan. Modeling of the 100-year elevation over a site like that, if it's not through a channel, is much harder than it looks. But we can certainly put notes on there that these are all going to be crawl space foundations. So just by the fact that they're crawl space, you'd anticipate a finished floor that's at least 30 inches above the existing ground around it, and the site itself is already up 2 or 3 feet above the 25-year elevation. But we can certainly put some notes, maybe that set a minimum finished floor elevation, something to that effect.
Yeah, it's just a very, it's a big change to this area, and stormwater heretofore was flowing relatively freely and had a large basin to back up into that is going to be eliminated by the fill that's being brought in the houses and the parking, and so
certainly needs to be addressed, because otherwise this property is not really going to be useful for anything. This is something that has to be addressed no matter what.
Right. And right now, I mean, it's an encumbrance on somebody who lawfully bought a piece of property and can't fill it because it's unlawfully being flooded. So the fact of the matter is it does need to be fixed, and I think the developer's going above and beyond what's required to fix it, and not only what's on his site, but offering to go downstream and fix things that aren't required.
Well, I think there are real. I think, I'm an advocate of these types of developments. This one is in a location that has potential adverse impacts that, if not engineered properly, and I don't doubt that they can be, it needs to be addressed. I mean, and our standard, you're right. Okay, you're detaining the 1-year storm. Well, it's a huge change for this area as to what's happening in larger events. And there are people downstream who are at risk. And there are people who will buy these homes that may be at risk if not done properly. So I think it'd be appropriate here to consider that 100-year, where it's going to go, and what impact it might have on those lots.
Are there any further thoughts from staff or representatives? Obviously, the staff felt that it was adequate. I'm just curious to know what your reaction is.
We recommended to the planning board and to you recommended approval because it meets the regulations that the town has in place, and in the opinion of staff, there is no damage to or impact, no increase in negative impacts to adjoining property owners from this development, that they are managing all of the impacts that they will be creating by doing this development. So the question then is, well, are our regulations adequate? Are our regulations sufficient to accomplish what our objectives are for the community? And that's a much larger question, of course. And you are working on a unified development ordinance that will raise some of those questions. But those aren't today's rules.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, I'd like to mention that the way the sewer is laid out, the public sewer is laid out,
It too, if it were installed as is, would intersect with the bioretention cell. It's to be publicly maintained so that if, in fact, there were issues with that sewer line and it needed to be re-excavated, that it again would be interfering with the bioretention cell. And bioretention cell is a very special item, which is an expensive item to work in and around. And so I think there are ways to change the alignment of the public sewer routing so that it does not intersect with the bioretention cell, and I'd like to see that done.
I have a question for the developer. Would you guys be willing to put this 30-inch pipe in down to that lower creek if this comes to a vote?
Boy, I'd have to go with the recommendation of the engineer on that one, and having not, I mean, there may be some issues as to, you know, grade there and what will fit. I mean, I'm certainly happy to do what I can, but also, you know, in line with what's workable and what makes sense. I mean, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. I just don't know enough about it, the particulars. Is that something we could, you know,
it's something we can
compute
certainly
with?
look at. I guess I would ask the question, what, besides the obvious of having a nice flat yard redone, you know, why would you want a closed conveyance system as opposed to an open? And then when you're talking the difference in tens of thousands of dollars. So there's a point at which, you know, being a nice neighbor turns to being taken advantage of. So I guess my question would be, look at it to see if it's possible, but what's the difference, or why the pipe instead of a close or a soil?
Jay, were you asking for a 30-inch pipe under the roadway, or?
From the other side, from the east side of Davis Street.
Oh, what's the...
There's a 30-inch pipe under the roadway and called for it. I think that what Ms. Farrell was suggesting is that we extend it past her house, you know, it's 150 feet or maybe a little more to the low-lying area in the back, with some significant large trees back there, all of which you have to take into consideration. If we start putting the pipe in and filling over top of it, what does it do to those trees? And can you even get the elevations to work? A swale is easier because you don't have to worry about burying a pipe. We can certainly look at whether or not you can bury a pipe, but again, burying a pipe is...
And I would think what distance we're talking about running to. I'm not...
You're proposing a 30-inch?
I believe the cross culvert under Davis Street is 30-inch.
I think your plan's calling out 24.
Maybe it's a 24.
Yeah.
Let me understand, where's the 30-inch in question that the neighbor wants? Is it parallel to the street?
I think she's asking for it from the end of the proposed culvert crossing back 150 feet or 200 feet past her house.
Going east and west, not going
Correct.
north and south. And the invert side here on the east side of the street, is it closed connection to the, or is it an open, is there a catch basin there?
On which side of the street?
As it crosses the street?
That right now is just, it's open, there's no catch basin. There's a ditch flows to it, and it's a...
What she's asking for, would that be closed connection or a catch basin?
Right, and at that point, I don't even know that you can make the ditch work and put an inlet there to get the ditch to flow to an inlet, or get enough fill over a pipe to send it back as far as you're looking to.
And where do we come up with 30 inches? Do we know that that'll take 25-year storm or take a storm? The source of the 30 inches is just Ms. Farrell suggested that.
Mr. Royal.
Fred did, okay.
We were talking about options.
Okay.
Which, I mean, logically, the next pipe downstream would obviously be bigger than the cross culvert, so 30-inch would make sense. But again, it's more of a, can you get the existing ditches on Davie Street? If you did have to put a structure there to be able to pipe out, can you get those existing ditches to still flow and get into an inlet? Because when you put the structure in, you know, you're talking about raising the bottom of the ditch up a couple of feet. To get a 30-inch pipe, you probably need 4.5 feet.
Yeah,
By the time you get a structure and a pipe, I just don't know that it's physically possible.
And again, this is not required. This is okay. Well, we've got a lot of questions for technical questions for Mr. Fielder. This is the lower board. Do you want to give the applicant an opportunity to address the commissioner's questions and make corrections and bring this back, or do you want to take some other actions? First of all, does the applicant understand that? Do you have a checklist of issues in your mind, or a piece of paper that you can go through and you need us to point that out?
And I think a realistic issue is that the inlet of that 24-inch pipe that's to carry the 25-year storm, I notice you've got a foot clear, and then you've got a grate around it, probably on 2-3 sides.
For which inlet?
The upstream, the furthest upstream component.
Yeah. You're talking about on the back, on the western side of the site?
Yeah. So
where there's a weird, where it just goes into the side of the bottom.
Right. You know, upstream of that is wooded area. There's going to be debris. It's going to get clogged.
Sure.
Big storm's going to come. The water's going to come up and come through the neighborhood, through this neighborhood and these homes. And that's what I'm worried about, is that the 100-year storm that's going to overpower that pipe, and those storms when maintenance hasn't been done. Homeowners are going to be expected to go out there and clean that, to keep it clear. I mean, I'd rather not even have the grate there. I'd rather just be open.
Right, but from a safety, and we talked about children falling out of golf carts earlier. Kids can just as easily get swept into a
crawl into there.
So
right.
I wouldn't design one without the grate there.
Well, it'll pose another issue, another safety issue.
Do you want to integrate and articulate the checklist for them to talk about a lot of stuff?
Yeah, I don't think I can go back. No, it is not. It is not. But I think this is unique in that there's essentially a dam being created with the project. And where is that water going to go? Right now, it comes through this little drainage area that has the ability to overwhelm that 24-inch pipe under the road and back up into the yard and become a big pond. This development's going to take away that storage volume. And so it's going to come up and over.
This development is going to push that storage volume back up to the neighbor's property where the water is coming from. And with all due respect, the system was analyzed and looked at more than once by 2 PEs and designed with a factor of safety to make sure that it was okay even in a 100-year storm. The pipe is set for a 25-year storm. There's overland flow for a 100-year storm. And again, the ordinance, we're well above and beyond the ordinance. Obviously, we can't design the world to withstand a 100-year storm. We do the best we can to toe the line between making sure that people are safe, the welfare and safety of the people that live there. And I mean, you can't design everything to a 100-year storm.
No, agreed. But I think this is a condition where I think it should be analyzed, and I think it should be documented.
Sure.
And
it has been. With all due respect, it has been. It's in the stormwater report that's been reviewed by the PE, who is the town engineer. We looked at the 100-year elevation and where it comes onto the site and where it backwaters and all that stuff. And it's been reviewed and approved. So.
Yeah, and I think what I'm asking is for that documentation to be on this set of plans.
Okay.
So that people who are going to follow this set of plans and create a plat from these plans will have that information available to them, so that when the builder does go to build a home that they're aware of where this path is, because, Lot 5, they're going to build it in the way of that path and be not knowledgeable of it? Will they have to take measures to remediate or modify that flow path to protect the home?
Okay, let me make a suggestion here to move this forward. Clearly, Commissioner Pilker has some technical issues he would like to have resolved. So I think taking action on this tonight is probably not going to happen. But if we send the applicant away with the homework to address these technical issues, I think it's important that everybody has a clear understanding of what it is we're asking them to do. And I don't think we've achieved that yet. You might have some.
I'm happy to read back what I've jotted down and see if it has a comprehensive list.
Okay. Do you want to do that orally, Mr. Weaver, or would you like to have him send that to the manager and then review it with the engineer?
I'd like to go orally. I'd like to hear our engineer also. So basically, I would like to hear later on.
Yeah. Well, why don't we go ahead and, once you orally enumerate what you think your homework is and make sure that Mr. Pilker is happy with it.
I have one question too. I would like to just, for someone to visually show us what happens in a 100-year storm. It sounds like you had a plan, but I want to see.
So there's a 100-year flow path. So water will back up here. Right now it comes from an outlet in the pond right here. It comes through to here to a weir box. And if it does back up, it goes around where there's not a swale, but there's a berm, which acts the same way. It diverts the water down to the ditch out on Davis Street, or it comes into the site, where there's also, if you look at the cross section of the site kind of comes down, and then there's another berm, and then the center of the site is crowned, so it basically pushes the drainage out to along the sidewalks, where there's kind of the low-lying area where all the runoff from the site goes out, it gets the bioretention area. So.
But you're concerned that it's not documented in this too?
Right. I'd like to know what that path is. Sure. The other thing is, right now, you also made mention of a flow path going on to the neighbor's property. Whereas heretofore, it comes off of the neighbor's property.
I mentioned it going around the backside of the berm,
Right.
not necessarily going onto the neighbor's property.
Well, it looks like the berm's right on that property line.
Well, it's 8 to 10 feet inside the property line.
The flow path of the water? It's right on the property.
On the property line.
Yeah. So we're taking water that would have ponded on this parcel and asking it to now go route on the adjoiner's property. I think you put a swale there, not a berm.
We'll follow up by email. Follow up items.
Why don't you go ahead and orally enumerate what you think your homework is? And
We've got the maintenance of the drainage pipe within Davie Street, and look at how we maintain that, being as that it's adjacent to the bioretention area. Verify the berm and that the bioretention is designed per the BMP manual.
And you're really getting that volume that you have, calculated.
Look at perimeter swales instead of diversion berms. Call out what type of protective fencing or railing will be at the top of the retaining wall. Specify materials for the screenings, whether it be fencing, evergreen plantings, or a combination of the two. Setting finished floor, minimum finished floor elevations, and expanding more on the plans on where the 100-year relief path is. Look at potentially rerouting the sanitary sewer to get that light that's going to tie to the existing sanitary sewer in Davie Street in a spot where it's easier to maintain without having to disturb the bioretention area.
Mm-hmm.
Verify that the weir design, and I can do this with a note on the plans, that the weir design takes into account the 100-year storm and that it's designed for safety. It's also designed to have the opening to take the amount of flow that it should.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
That's it.
What about the pipe on the east side property?
I've got another question, I guess, being, if and I guess it's more of a question for you, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but if physically a 30-inch pipe would fit to the east, is that something where the town or the adjacent owner is willing to look at a cost sharing? And there's a significant difference between building a swale and putting down a, you know,
We have to
$25,000, $30,000 worth of pipe.
Like I said, Mike will take away the ditch, it'll kill trees, so is that really what we want to do? I think we need to get some engineering input on that.
And again, that's not required by the ordinance for your project, that's off-site, right? Correct. Okay. So I guess my next question is, if we've given the applicant a comprehensive list of what our expectations are for reworking this, and he comes back and he satisfies all those, we just deny this, that seemed like a great disservice to him. So if there are other concerns that board members have, I would ask that you raise them now and make the applicant aware of them, so that he doesn't go back and do $4,000 or $5,000 worth of work only to come back and have his application denied a month from now. If you have other concerns, now the time, I think, to express them.
I have just one. Mr. Oakley brought up at the planning board meeting, in the land use plan, is the home design and the site development not being compatible with the neighborhood. You know, we're packing in 9 houses, homes right here on 1 acre lot. That's a lot. And I know it's in our ordinance. It was actually put in. I think I came on the board about a month or 2 after that was one of the first things I agreed on that, and that was something.
Yeah, I think we did that for a pocket project over near Potterstone Village.
Yeah, and I hope this looks nothing like that.
I've been over there to see it.
I do think in Pittsburgh Roads, it's difficult, but things are going to get more, as part of urban design, it's more efficient to have homes closer to town. It's going to happen. The question is too much. We have zoned it that way, so it's in compliance.
So if there are no other questions, I hear a motion to table this until the applicant brings it back with the corrective actions requested by Commissioner Fielko.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, sir, I guess you have your marching orders, and we'll wait to hear from you when you are ready to resubmit.
Thank you very much.
Return.
Appreciate it.
Okay, that brings us to our next item of new business, which is process review for review and approval of small area plans pursuant to the Chatham Park Master Plan. Mr. Hall addresses.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Board of Commissioners approved a rezoning and master plan for the Chatham Park Plan Development District, and there's a lot of information about that that has come before all of us and you, and I won't be going over that. But the one key point of the master plan that you approved was a call for development and approval of small area plans. So there was and one of the ways that I have thought about this and described it to people when questions were asked is that the level of detail at a master plan is at one level, and that there's a level of detail at individual site plans and site designs is another level down here. And somewhere in between is a level of detail that would be useful and helpful to everybody, and it's the small area plan. So that provision was built into your approval of the master plan, calling for identifying 27 sectors on Chatham Park development, and saying that there should be that no development shall occur until small area plans are submitted and approved for those areas, with the caveat of the 515. That up until that point, there is development that can occur up to a maximum threshold for number of residential dwelling units and non-residential floor area. So that is that's been in place. What's not in place is what is the process for submittal and review and approval of small area plans as they are prepared. And so that is what we're bringing to you tonight. Is we have been looking at the language and intent of the master plan, at the other provisions for review of plans and zoning, subdivision, so on. And we have constructed what we believe is a good balance and a reasonable way to approach the submittal and approval of master plans. So in a nutshell, we've got what we are suggesting to you is that you, after discussion, we're hoping that you will endorse this or some other version of a process for dealing with small area plans. And what we're suggesting here is that there be information be put together, and this process gets pretty specific about what kind of information should be included in a master plan. And that comes from several sources. In the master plan itself, there is a list of information that needs to be included in master plans, in small area plans. And then in looking at other ordinances and other policies and procedures that the town has, we have blended together what we think is a very reasonable and balanced approach to the information requirements that should be included in any master plan submittal. So then the question is process. So what should be the procedure for review and action on a small area plan? And what we have constructed is the following. It's 6 steps for this proposed process that we are bringing to you tonight, that we're asking you to endorse. First, when the applicant is ready to prepare one or more small area plans, there would be a pre-submittal meeting that where the applicant would come talk to the town's zoning enforcement officer. Right now that's me, and soon it will be somebody else, but to talk about the small area plan, what the geography is, what is to be included, and to be sure that there is an alignment of an understanding of what is the area, what's to be included in the small area plan, what kind of information, so on. And then subsequent to that pre-submittal meeting, the applicant would submit a small area plan, and it could be for one of those 27 areas, it could be for some aggregation of those individual 27 areas, either way. Following submittal, the town zoning enforcement officer would determine whether or not the application is complete and has everything that it needs to have in it, and upon that determination and notification of the applicant, then there would be a public information meeting that the applicant would sponsor to allow the small area plan to be presented and questions to be asked, and there to be dialogue about it. Then following that public information meeting, there'd be a staff report that be put together, taken to the planning board, asking the planning board for review and recommendation. Then there might be revisions following the planning board's recommendation. And then the final step is review and action by you, the Board of Commissioners. A couple of observations about this. Clearly there is a lot of interest in Chatham Park, and there will be a lot of interest in stakeholders, residents, wanting to know what is being proposed in these small area plans, because the small area plans would be then the guidance for additional, the actual specific development. So there needs to be opportunity for public review and comment on these smaller plans as they go forward. We are suggesting here two main opportunities for that, one at the beginning and then one near the end. So the beginning is this public information meeting where people can come and understand what's being proposed. And then we are making a suggestion here that is at slight variation with your typically adopted policies for your Board of Commissioners meeting. So I want to be specific about that. In our thought, there would be value in having people be able to come and see. It would be a public event and be able to make comments on at the beginning. And then also when you're getting ready to take your action on a small area plan, we're suggesting that giving yourselves the flexibility, if you choose to allow public comment to you at that last stage before you act. So that's that is it in a nutshell. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about, and then I'll stop, and you might have questions for me or somebody else. There's one other piece of the master plan that is related to all of this, which is called additional elements. And I'm sure you remember that one of the provisions in the Chatham Park master plan is that these small area plans be produced, and also additional provisions that have more detail about development specifics. And the list is in the master plan: tree protection plan, master signage plan, lighting plan, master landscaping plan, affordable housing, and so on. There's a list of those additional provisions. So those are also going to be prepared by the applicant. The master plan does specify a process for review and approval of those, which is the same as if it's a zoning amendment to a zoning ordinance. So the master plan calls for additional elements and specifies a process for review and approval. The master plan calls for small area plans, but does not specify the process. So that's why we're here tonight, is to suggest the process for small area plans. Now, the reason I bring that up is that as I've been looking at this, and we've all been talking about it, there seems to be benefit in allowing the possibility of additional elements in small area plans to be coming through the process simultaneously. Not that they have to be, but one of the things that kinds of questions we're hearing is, wouldn't it be helpful to have some information about the intent for landscaping or for lighting or for affordable housing, which are additional elements, as small area plans are being prepared. We've also heard the opposite. In doing small area plans, wouldn't it be helpful to have that information as we're doing these additional elements? So none of that is sequencing is required, but one of the things that we have built into this in our memorandum to you is the suggestion that if there is possibility of information that is related to each other coming forward at the same time, that there would be benefit in allowing that to happen. So what we're asking you for tonight is an endorsement of this process for the submittal and approval by you of a series of small area plans for Chatham Park. I'll stop there.
Okay, I'll ask the first question and then open it to the rest of the board. To clarify what it is you're asking for tonight, I assume this would be codified at some point in either an ordinance or a resolution or a policies document. I don't see that here tonight.
It wouldn't be an ordinance, and this is just an administrative procedure. This is the procedure for that would be followed for approval of this. So it's not ordinance. I agree with you that it falls more in the category of policy and procedure.
So what I'm trying to think, maybe the attorney could.
Yes. So what we're asking you tonight is for your endorsement. We think that this is a good way to proceed, and if you agree and would be willing to endorse the use of this procedure by the manager and staff as we go forward, then that's what we're asking for.
Okay. And will we see it again in a finished format?
This is finished format.
This is it. Okay. As we adopt it tonight.
The first page and a half is the memo from Mr. Walden. The process begins on page 3. So that's what we're talking about.
Okay, so if we concur that we like this process, it'll just become part of our policies and procedures. You don't require ordinance or resolution or anything like that, just...
I think just want to throw out one thing, like on page 5, it talks about descriptions of proposed development of small area, including in the last bullet under descriptions of proposed development, talks about description of Southwest Shore Plan recommendations that have been considered. I just would like for somehow the maps that Catherine, you could have a name for. There's maps specifically about sensitive natural areas on Chatham Park property. To me, that should also be part of the process to look at these maps that they've created that show where the most sensitive are and have it ranked by number. To me, it seems like that should also be on the consideration.
There is reference to the Southwest.
This is a little different. This is more specific, right? This is.
Are you talking about the overlay district, or are you talking about the maps that show the different layers that make up the overlay?
Well, that's what you all have done. You know, I feel like that should be considered because it's specifically Chatham Park property.
It was purposeful not to include that as in this process, partly because it's a work in progress, and it's.
Well, the maps have already been done. We were given a notebook some time ago, like 2 years ago. Right?
Right. Yes, that and that's referenced in the master plan.
I'm not talking about the ordinance work.
Right.
About
Gotcha.
the maps that were done specifically for more detailed than what this is.
Yes, and thank you. And what the master plan calls for says it does refer to that as information that should be used in consideration of preparing master plan, all of the plans for Chatham Park going forward. So it would be.
But it's different than the Southwest Shore plans. What I'm talking about is not. They're related, but this is more specific. The notebook that I'm talking about.
Well, the master plan, in talking about what's required of the small area plan, specifically says Southwest Shore Plan.
Yes.
And
we can't add something else.
Not at this point. No, we'd have to amend the master plan to do that.
I think that any information that is available can be considered, but in terms of making any requirements for what has to be submitted or any standards or that have to be met.
It just has to be considered. They're just asking it to be considered.
And I think that everything would be considered.
Not on here.
Well, I think we've got a very specific list of things that are going to be considered. I don't think we can say, well, let's consider X, Y, and Z. We have a master plan that says these are the things you're going to consider.
Well, for example, if the master plan calls for consideration of existing environmental conditions, wildlife, and so on, and so there's information out there that can be drawn upon to be looking at that.
Well, but it specifically lists environmental features including streams, buffers, wetlands, steep slopes, greater than 20%, natural heritage areas, upland, mature, hardwood forests, subwatersheds containing federal listed aquatic species, and game, land, hunting safety buffers. That's what it requires. So to add to that list outside of the process of the master plan is not a possibility.
I think we can still use the work of this committee that's working on our conservation ordinances.
It was even done before we started the conservation ordinance. It's a lot of work. There's some from the top conservation and wildlife organizations in the area, and they're the experts in the field, and I just want to make sure that their work is considered in future work because they know this area better than anybody else as far as what are the most important areas.
Maybe I could just clarify this. The list that you all are addressing is a list of what is to be contained in an application for a small area plan. What you all consider in reviewing the small area plan is up to you. You can consider anything that you think is relevant. And so if you think that there's information that's available to you that you think has some bearing on the application, then you certainly are entitled to do that. Mr. Gutto's point was that the master plan talks about what a small area plan shall contain in terms of the information that the developer is expected to provide. How you all go about evaluating or considering that application is up to you. And it's a matter that you can certainly draw upon any resource you think is relevant or appropriate.
I think in the case of some of those maps that Commissioner Foley mentions, this last bullet here, and I think Commissioner Fiocco mentioned it as well, a lot of the discussion that went into developing this bullet within the master plan came from a pretty lengthy discussion of those maps that appeared, as I recall. And so the final decision on the master plan kind of hinged on how much of that we were going to incorporate. See the mention of the natural heritage areas and the hardwood forest and some watersheds, and that's kind of where we landed as we approved the master plan. And so that in fact is one of your considerations here. So I mean you are actually taking that into account.
And I think that Mr. Foley, if I'm trying to think this through, we're in the middle of a process, like Mr. Waller pointed out, where this group is still working to produce a finished product, and we're exploring ways to incorporate that into the UDO. And the master plan already says that the Chandler Park will abide by the terms and conditions of the UDO. So to that extent, it will be considered.
Right, I understand. I just want to make sure that it's on the record.
Okay.
And I appreciate what you're saying, and I also appreciate Mr. Messick's additional comments on, and I think he said better than he said better than I did what I was trying to say, which is that there's one body of things that are required to be prepared and submitted as part of the master plan. But then if there's information that any of us thinks is useful in evaluation of that, absolutely it can be considered.
And I think too, in terms of additional items, and I don't mean to rankle, but I mean the Southwest Shore Plan was never formally adopted by the board at any point in time.
It was recommended by the consultant that we heard that the board did not adopt.
And the applicant actually included mention of the Southwest Shore Plan in the master plan. And so that's why it's reflected here, again, as a reflection of the master plan document that you guys just approved. So, and again, in a way, that those are additional considerations that are above and beyond what we formally adopt as a board.
Any other comments, questions from the board?
I've got some comments.
Okay.
Use of the word description of proposed development within the small area. Are we talking about maps? Are we talking about writing?
Yes. And drawings.
Both?
Sure.
Let's say that.
Say what?
Say that these will have maps and descriptions.
I guess for me, I believe that the term description of what's being proposed includes words and pictures.
It says in their layout.
Mm-hmm. I would hate to be up here trying to read through what somebody's trying to tell me on a map.
I'm not sure I understand.
I can appreciate the gap there, but I don't want to be sitting on this board when someone hands me 2 paragraphs and says, that's my plan.
I can't imagine any possible circumstance in which that would occur.
Well, let's avoid that altogether. And
by saying, so what would?
I'd say plans and maps, plans and descriptions.
Including maps.
Yeah.
First of all, you got to understand, I think, that to the extent that whatever is required here in this policy is not complied with by the applicant, then you certainly don't have to determine that it is complete in the first place or approve it the second. It says detailed descriptions of proposed development. Now, I guess detailed means different things to different people, and obviously to you, descriptions means different things than it would to Roger. And so, I mean, at some point, you don't have to approve it if you don't think it's complete or satisfactory or adequate.
But by the time that happens, there's been a lot of water under the bridge.
So are we at?
I'm just trying to get clarity.
Are we on page 5 of the?
Yeah.
Okay. And so your suggestion is that, for example, in the second bullet where it says descriptions of existing conditions, that there be a couple of extra words there that say including maps and narrative?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the same thing
Same
for
for
the
proposed.
next one.
Yeah, thanks.
Got it.
Can we expand on what we mean by existing public infrastructure? Can we have some list of what we're talking about? I think we're talking water lines, we're talking roads, sewer, parks, open space, trails.
Well, in terms of existing, it's pretty minimal.
Correct.
So streets, probably, possibly utilities.
Okay.
Just want some sub-bullets there.
Yeah.
So this is the, under descriptions of existing conditions, existing public infrastructure?
Yeah.
To be more descriptive?
Mm-hmm. Please. For the proposed conditions, the bullet regarding the Southwest Shore Plan, I think what the master plan asks for is that those recommendations be considered. So if we can ask the applicant to tell us which ones were considered and which ones were implemented, that'd be helpful. Proposed conditions, I would like to add to the list of things that the small area plan should include is the approach to affordable housing, the approach to transit, the approach to recreation facilities and open space, and the approach to the provision of fire, police, schools, and administrative facilities. And those are all items that come straight out of the small area plan. It has a list of requirements, so to leave them off, I think, would not do us any service.
Well, the recreation, open space, and buffer areas is already included in the third bullet from the bottom.
Okay. Got it. Great.
So, you're saying that, for example, on affordable housing, that you're saying that that's included in the master plan?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm saying that.
One of the additional elements.
Right, it's an additional element. That's different from a small area plan. That's what I was talking about before. There are two things we're talking about here. One is the small area plans, and the other one is additional elements. And so I think that they are separate. The additional elements are very, very detailed, and they're almost like ordinance kind of standards. That's why the process is those go through the same process as an ordinance amendment would go through. The small area plan is more like a plan. It's general guidance. It doesn't have that level of detail that the additional elements have, which is why we were suggesting that if it's possible for those both to be considered together, the small area plans and the additional elements, to the extent that that's possible, there would be benefit in that, and so we would like to be encouraging that. But again, those are two different things. The small area plans, additional elements are not the same.
Right. No, I stand corrected. Affordable housing is not. I thought it was.
And to the extent that it already provides for an approach to providing bicycle pedestrian facilities internal to the small area in connection to roads and bicycle and pedestrian travel exterior to the small area, what other than that do you mean by transit?
Well, there is the statement about mass transit in this master plan. in whether or not there's going to be a location for a facility or facilities. Would be a good thing to have on a small area plan.
Well, and if it's contemplated that we're going to have a Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill style bus line, and the roads need to accommodate bus stops and whatnot. So, see what you get from.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess I would suggest that under descriptions of proposed development of the small area plan, road layout and types material of the small area plan is something that would encompass what you're talking about. If you're looking at an area plan, obviously this is a very large area, 10 apartments, so there's some small areas where there is going to be probably denser development than others, and some of the areas probably be more easily served by transit than others. And so there's some small areas where attention to the road layout to be accommodating buses and so on would be very important. Other small areas where that might be less important.
Right. And may just be a designation to be retrofitted in the future. Okay. Last bullet, financial impact analysis, focusing on required public facilities. I'd like to say public services and facilities. Item 3, public information meeting, makes mention of this meeting occurring in Chatham County. I think we should have it in Pittsboro or within the ETJ of Pittsboro. This question, Mr. Messick. First sentence, page 6, says application materials contain all of the information required by this small area plan process. Is that in any way putting at risk the idea that this document supersedes the master plan that lists all the things to be included in a small area plan?
Only if it didn't include all the things that were required in the master plan.
Okay. So by default, it will. And if it doesn't, it will have to.
I think we did.
It does. It does. Okay.
It does.
That's all I got.
Other questions, comments? Let's go down the line. Mr. Turner. Okay. Some additional time to go through the emails you got. Okay.
I think it's a strong plan. The concern I had was just get that special element at the same time as giving the other upstream. So it's very cool.
Commissioner Farrell.
Just one of the procedures in number 2 where it says submit a small area plan application within 10 days. I assume that's 10 business days.
Good point. Yes.
Okay. And in the description of the proposed development small area plans, I know we spoke to this, Mr. Messick. Do we have a percent of each one of these small area plans for open space? Is that in that small site plan like that? Do we have a percent of what open space is for each small area plan?
I don't remember. I think it was a gross overall. It was a gross overall number. Yeah.
Some small area places will have more natural, plant areas than
sure.
others. So.
Okay. And this does look fine. The only problem, not a problem, but I know we're in the process of hiring a planner, and I feel like if we go ahead with this document here, we should really consider our new planner, not knocking you, Roger, by any means. You've done a great job. I just
No
feel like
knocking.
our new planner on board should have some input on this.
Well, what, you can ask the manager, what kind of a delay does that entail? Are we close to knowing the name of that person?
Close to hiring, but as far as starting, we're within 30 days of someone actually starting.
Okay, that's not too onerous a delay then.
Honestly, nothing against who we were going to hire. I don't know how they're going to have more detailed input. Sort of like Rogers and his experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I think Commissioner Farrell might be saying that just sort of a courteous welcome to the new person, as a courtesy. Here you are new to the staff. We'd like to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this. Again, I don't think they're going to be able to improve on what Roger's done tremendously, but I kind of get what Commissioner Farrell's saying, that as a courtesy to the new person. And I think Commissioner Baldwin's expressed that she may need some additional time to consider input. She's received via emails. I think that we all receive via emails. So
It's also worth noting that you need to have the policy in place before you receive the small area plans.
Yeah.
And you don't have any control when that happens. So it would behoove you to act promptly.
Yeah. Understood. Okay, I have a couple of questions if Commissioner Farrell's like. Yeah, that's good. With respect to this, your suggestion to have public input on the same day that we take action on a small area plan, I'd like to hear the board's comments on that. We've this will sort of be a de facto public hearing. I know my experience in public hearings that draw a lot of interest is by the end of the night the board's exhausted and sometimes in no condition to make a well-informed decision about much of anything. But so I wonder if we're going to have a de facto public hearing. I know there's none required by law at this juncture, but if we want to build this opportunity into it, I would just call it a public hearing and have it one meeting before the meeting where we make the decision. I'm interested to hear what y'all think about that. Do you really want to sit through 3 hours of public expression and then make your decision, or would you rather have some time to think about the public before?
I don't think there's anything that makes us make the decision that evening. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm comfortable, putting the decision off if we feel it's appropriate.
I think we decided that for a good consensus, so I think it would be good if we can move to this too. I agree.
So you're agreeing that we should separate the two?
Yeah.
I think Commissioner Cook was saying that we always have the option to table it anyway.
One idea would be to, I think about the term public comment session or something like that. The public hearing tends to indicate a legal process. But it does seem like there is, looking at everything that I've been able to see so far, it seems like it would be very wise to have, as I mentioned earlier, an opportunity for public getting information at the beginning of when a smaller plan comes in, and then the public being able to make comments to you at the end in some fashion, either the same night or another one. Not in a legal public hearing, sworn testimony way, but in offering you opinions and comments.
As written, the policy just says that prior to any decision, you may allow public input. It doesn't say you have to, but you may. And you may even do it at the last minute. You don't have to, but you may. If you choose not to do that, not to make a decision at the time you're receiving the public input, you certainly have that prerogative. It's completely up to you how you want to handle that.
Well, the attorney and Commissioner Field will make a good point if we end up with because I've had public hearings where you expect a big crowd and nobody comes. I've had one where you expect nobody and 60 people come. Yeah. So maybe the best is to use Commissioner Fioco's suggestion. If we get the marathon public hearing and we're exhausted and we decide to table it, we can handle it that way. Is that? look at everybody. Yeah.
Mayor Cherry, may I ask a clarifying question?
I'm going to entertain a question from Mr. Bonds. Go ahead. Sure.
So with regard to the public information meeting that is to be performed by the applicant, would that be like the format that we saw last week? Or would that be a central forum, a centralized presentation with an agenda?
Yeah, I don't know. What are we requiring at the public information meeting? Are we going to try and frame that, or are we leaving it totally to the applicant?
Good question. And as we're making adjustments to this, maybe that's something we can clarify further. The part of the context here is that smaller plans are going to be different. There are 27 of these, and they're not all going to be the same. And so the circumstances, one smaller plan might be different from another. There might be one that has a lot of public interest associated with it, another one that has less so. But as we were drafting this, I believe that the intention was, as was just described, that there'd be a presentation of the small area plan, and an opportunity for people to ask questions and offer comments on what was being presented. So I would think that it would be useful to have some kind of language in here that would describe that would say what is anticipated would happen at this point.
Yeah, I didn't go to the meeting Mr. Bonds makes reference to, but I had people describe it to me, and so I understand his question. That meeting was more of a marketing kind of a meeting than a presentation of an application where you give a lot of detail. And I don't think we want that to be the public information. I think what we need is more of the same sort of presentation they would eventually give the board.
Yes. I think that's what was anticipated with this, and it might be helpful to clarify that.
Okay, thanks.
That meeting was just a broad overview of things.
And then my last comment is on paragraph 4 of the review, recommendations by the planning board. I wonder if we've been sufficiently explicit there in our expectations about what we want the planning board to do. We say the planning board shall issue a recommendation to the town board regarding the small area plan. I'm not sure the word issues makes me comfortable. I would like to say that the planning board shall prepare a recommendation, and if necessary with the assistance of the town staff and the town attorney. And what I'm getting at here is I'm not really interested in seeing any more planning board recommendations that are written by the applicant. I'd like the planning board to actually do one. I don't want to just issue me a document that they got from the applicant.
Prepare is a good word.
And other than that, I think it's a good process, a thorough process. I think it'll serve us well.
So just to make sure I understand it, what I'm hearing the board say is make some changes to this that you have, as you've described tonight. And then I also heard some of you say that you've got some emails that you'd like to think about and so on. So you can pass some of that along, some of those along to us also. This would then return at another board meeting.
Yes, sir.
Yep. Do you agree?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. That brings us to managers' updates and reports.
Be right back.
the flag. Oh, cool. That's the memorial plaque honoring Paige Vernon, whose park is named after. Paul Horn dropped that off today, so I thought you guys might like to take a look at that.
Very nice.
We're probably contemplating two additional plaques that are going to be a bit smaller than that. We'll have one plaque that takes into account the significant donation that we received from the trust, not from the trust.
The Blair.
Yes, and then there were some local contributions that were made of slightly smaller amounts. So we're looking at probably one slightly larger one for the slightly larger contribution, and then a smaller one from the number of other, commercial smaller contributions. So, and those will all be prominently placed at different spots. I believe the one that we're looking at right there will be placed on a border or on a boulder in the front of the park and landscaping. And so, we're looking this week to complete the remaining items with the exception of the brick cap. So we're looking at the retaining wall. The brick cap is supposed to go on top of the retaining wall, but I'm advised that we'll be receiving furniture, fencing, stormwater pipe. We don't have word yet as far as Duke Energy's anticipated installation of some power, and we're supposed to be hearing about that shortly. I think there's a possibility that it could be installed at the same time. That you'll recall the Christmas trees, we've talked about that. Christmas trees. The street trees being powered up for Christmas lights. And so the hope is that the work will be completed at that same time. And then we're expecting an event on October 10th. Planning director, we talked about that tonight with assistance from Roger, from Diane Reed, from Chatham County EDC, and Mr. Messick. We interviewed 4 candidates last week. I'm expecting to gather 1 or 2 of them for a meeting with department heads within the next week. And then, depending on availability, we're looking at a start date for the new planner, hopefully sooner than later in September. So I think you guys are going to be happy with the final result because there were a few that we interviewed. I think that we could very well use almost immediately. Asphalt paving, as I indicated in the attached the memo, we're looking at an RFP right now. We'll be looking at an RFP when they're submitted fully at the end of this week. The list, as you can see there, involves mainly a significant stretch of Salisbury Street on both sides of Hillsborough, but also a small stretch of Barron, West Chatham, and then Log Barn. That's about 4,200 feet of streets, and that's going to be fully funded by Powellville. Like I had kind of alluded to earlier, once the bid pricing comes in, and it looks like we can't, if for whatever reason we cannot meet the roster here that we've identified, then we may be able to scale that back. Likewise, we could also consider even adding some streets if it appears as if we've come way under. I want to exercise caution on this because I'm advised from some of our preliminary diligence in that apparently with the economy heating up a bit, so has asphalt production, and this is the time of year when a lot of that tends to be happening in pretty significant projects. And unfortunately, as we can see with the sidewalk project, oftentimes when we have a slightly smaller scale compared to what contractors are typically dealing with, relatively smaller scale projects like we'll see in Pittsburgh tend to receive a little bit less attention maybe than some of the larger projects that you'd see in Lake. But we will let you know once we're ready to start on that. And I think the end date for asphalt paving, like last year, is to have all of that done by the time that the street fair is ready to commence. East Street sidewalk, you'll see that it's been poured in. In large part, we've got two stretches right now where we don't have sidewalk poured. The one stretch that's kind of problematic is right in front of the post office, where I'm told that they're waiting for some storm drain structures to arrive, and then they'll be able to form and then pour, and then I believe they formed in also at the far end of the project, heading towards the mobile home park road. And then finally, and I don't know if you guys want to attack this in this portion or in your comment section, but the last meeting we kind of had nailed down a workshop date, and I think we need to probably address that at some point this month. Our original intention tonight was to have the wastewater plant PER delivered and presented to you tonight. We held off on that for a workshop. So in order to have staff and to have our consultants fully prepared, we need to kind of arrive at a secondary date if the one that we had originally. With that, I would open it up for any comments or questions, however you want to deal with it.
See, our original date for that was September 10. Yeah. So we already eliminated the 24th as an event we all have to be at, or many of us have to be at. How's the 17th for people? Anybody got an issue with the 17th? It's just a 1 week. It's a 1 week delay. Same time. Same time. We said 4 o'clock before. We started at 4.
Yes, sir.
17th works for us. Okay. Did we also, while we're doing work sessions, we talked about one for the conservation ordinance work session. I don't think that one has to be done in September or October either. But what's everybody's? Is that ready to happen? The materials are in a state of preparedness that it can happen anytime?
The materials are.
Okay. Okay, so it seems like we like Thursdays. So there's that. Let's see if we try and get it off of a board meeting week. It would be Thursday the 8th and Thursday the 22nd of October.
Why we go down?
Okay. 8th of October. That work for folks?
That's going to pretty much shoot us for the loan application. Well, no, actually, we'll be all right. Never mind.
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay. October 8th.
4:30.
It's going to push us back for beginning the conversation, I guess, with Deaner on a loan application for any expansion work. So we were looking at the end. We were looking to.
No, we moved on to another.
This is for the.
This is for the conservation. This is for the.
Okay.
The conservation ordinance.
It would be nice to do this presentation at Athens planning board, planning director, which sounds like they'd be here. Yeah.
So the utility work session is on the 17th of September.
That you're not going to do these on the same night then?
No.
Yeah. So I thought they were.
Okay.
I thought they were immediate up to individual. So the 17th of September.
Thanks.
And the 8th of October.
Yes,
Are we comfortable with 4 again? Okay.
Is that like in the afternoon? Is that unfortunate?
Right. Yeah, we don't do anything in the morning.
Well, I didn't hear this time.
Okay.
Sorry.
4 p.m. now. So that's who will be here. Okay.
Actually, what time I have to be working tomorrow?
Okay. Any other business for you?
Yeah, let me just mention one other thing too that Mr. Poteet and I have been following up on. There was some discussion, question at the last meeting about finishing work in Powell Place and punch list items. And the feedback that Mr. Poteet received to this point was that the punch list that had been developed with Bryson Powell, who works for the developer, and Fred a few months ago. Mr. Powell indicated that the final punch list items he felt could be comfortably completed by the end of the first quarter of 2016, which is another way of saying sometime January, February, March, by the end of March in 2016, which to me seems questionable as far as why it needs to take that long. So following up and trying to determine why exactly it's going to take that long to complete the list of things that have been given to him quite some time ago. So I will be able to report back to you on that. I think in a little bit more detail soon. And that's all I have.
Okay, we will do our commissioner concerns before the closed session. I don't have any EDC or mayor updates. Anything from? Okay, we know the fairground. We know our fair is on the opening on the 10th. Gig downtown. Commissioner Farrell, any commissioner concerns?
I had some citizens still concerned about the sidewalk on the west side of town coming back to the school. Seems like that's been on hold, or we could follow up on that from House down to this corner.
Concerned that they don't want it, or
No, they won't know what the holdup is, and I've told them, DOT has been.
Well, we have some right of way.
Yeah. They just were concerned that the east sidewalk to nowhere, and why they couldn't get a sidewalk. So I'll leave it at that.
The west side.
That's all I have.
Mine is not concerned. I just wanted to, I don't know if the board has heard about this project, and I think it's really interesting that's happening on the fairgrounds. In partnership with Chatham Habitat for Humanity and another nonprofit, they're going to be building a 364 square foot house that will eventually be moved. It will be built in just a few days during the fair, and then it's going to be moved to a farm in Chatham County, and there will be 9 other houses built, 10 total. The houses will sell kind of almost like the pocket park idea, just small homes and park areas. And the mortgage payments are expected to be between $200 and $300 a month. So it's really a neat project that's starting right here in Pittsburgh Fairgrounds.
I think they said they were going to build it in one day.
I've heard.
Or during the fair.
During the fair, building in the fair. Yes, it's on the front page of the Independent. It's on the Town of Pittsburgh Facebook page too.
Is that not passed?
I don't know about that. It's not part of it. What about that song? That's all I have. I'll just share that with you.
And then they're going to move it to a farm
Chatham County.
in Chatham County for the citizens who have disabilities. That's what they're doing. Yes. I think it's great.
There was a lot of interest on Facebook about it. We got like over 4,000 people saw it. Loved it.
Thank you. I'd like to make sure we get the replacement, the corrected sheets from the master plan that were identified.
I have those.
Okay, great. And our online version is got some formatting issues. So if we could get that corrected.
Can you tell me exactly what those are? Because
the first item is the text of the master plan.
in this section?
Yeah, the very top item. If you scroll down, you'll see that there's I looked at it. Go to page 41.
You gotta let it load. That 9600
There we go.
watt.
There, it's starting to.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't think it was intended to be that way. At least not in my booklet, it's not. So if you were to have a conversation with somebody about, see the item on page 44, they might not be getting the same data that you're trying to convey. Yeah. Yeah, it can. I was actually having a conversation with somebody about it. So.
And that's what they were talking about?
Hmm?
And these gaps are what they were talking about?
It's a formatting issue that can make communication difficult. If I'm looking at my paper copy and they're looking at something online.
Okay. Because I thought you were saying before that was that they couldn't see anything.
No. Okay. I didn't think I was saying that.
Okay.
Yeah. That's it.
Mr. Bowles.
Actually, of course, everybody talks about the fairground, and I have Triangle Council Government meeting tomorrow. So if anybody wants me to speak about anything, I'll be more than happy regionally. And also, I did just receive a text message from Reverend Anthony Davis, and he is requesting a resolution of the city. So, but this one will need to be some changes made on it. So.
But that's coming up real quick, right?
It's coming up Thursday.
Okay.
It's just a few
Okay.
changes where he said he would request that instead of called Mitchell's Chapel Day, Durham District Day, it welcomes Dr. Lawrence A. Turner and Durham District of the A.M.E. Zion Church on behalf of the town.
That's a little more you want to have Commissioner Baldwin reread the corrected text into the record and we'll make a motion to adopt it.
Yes.
Okay. You want to do that? You want to read it as corrected?
I will not. Thank you. Whereas welcoming the Durham District of the A.M.E. Zion Conference to Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Whereas the Durham District of the A.M.E. Zion Church will be holding its 90th session of the district in Pittsburgh on Thursday, August 27th and Friday, August 28th. And whereas the district is comprised of a large number of A.M.E. Zion churches in Chatham County and around the Triangle, and whereas the host church for this important conference is Mitchell's Chapel A.M.E. Zion Church, which is located at 1025 Mitchell's Chapel Road in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and whereas the host pastor is Reverend Anthony Davis of Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Commissioners of the town of Pittsburgh does hereby officially name Thursday, August 27th as the Durham District Day and welcomes Dr. Lawrence A. Miller, presiding elder, and the Durham District of the A.M.E. Zion Church on behalf of the town, the attendees of the two-day conference to the town of Pittsburgh.
Do I hear a motion to adopt?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed, and the motion carries. And if we'll give this to, Madam Clerk, could you correct this formatting and I'll come and sign this for you?
No, I can. Okay, you can deliver this.
I'll be there.
Well, I'll get you this one with that.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll get it to Commissioner Ball.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all that I have right now.
Mr. Turner?
Just one little thing. People always talk to me about speeding, but I think that at the last meeting, you said that you were going to dispatch some extra people or some, the speed. I can't even think right now, the speed radar thing. And people noticed and they said
Yes.
thank you, so it's helping.
Thank you. And we were able to get the trailer that we discussed with Mayor Terry, and we deployed it to Chatham Forest. And right now, the sheriff's office using it again, and we'll be getting it back in a few more days. And so we're using that one some now, and I'm looking at some other options also.
Thank you. I think it's good. People have noticed it.
Thank you.
I meant to say thank you for that,
Yes.
and I did
Any-
notice it.
any input's appreciated.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the end of our regular meeting, and we have a closed session scheduled here. Do I hear a motion to go into closed session?
Can we take a 5-minute break before we do that?
Well, while we're doing it?
Before we do that?
Before we do that, okay.
All right, we can do it while we're doing this. I want to leave this room for a minute.
Well, we can go into closed session because there's a lot of shuffling to close the doors anyway. Why don't we go ahead and make the motion?
Okay. Pursuant to NCGS 143-31811A5, to discuss purchase of real estate. I'd like to go into closed session.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We'll go into closed session. Momentarily.
Yes.